Hey everyone. So today I'm going to be having another interview, a conversation with a young man named Alexandre Jolivier. He's from Montreal, originally from France, studying in Montreal. I believe he's at the university, Concordia University. Not sure exactly what he's studying, but we're going to be discussing some very important topics. He was one of the gentlemen that reached out to me in response to my video and my Facebook post where I've been asking people, hey, if you want to discuss, politics, religion, philosophy, economics, history, whatever's on your mind, I'm more than willing to have these kind of conversation or discussions or debates with people. And he reached out to me early on, and because he was very busy in his studies, like I say, he's going to school, we had to postpone it for, till today, which has been a couple weeks. But we're going to have this conversation, and I hope you're going to be paying attention and listening astutely to what this young man has to say, because we really do, especially those of us in the older generations, I'm a Gen Xer, or even some of those of us, those in the boomer generation, we have to reach out to these young people, right? These people represent the future. So you have to be able to have these kinds of conversations with the younger generations who are the up-and-comers, who are going to have to deal with the consequences and the result of the expansion of government and the intervention of governance into our social and economic lives, in our social or economic sphere. So I hope you enjoy this video. We'll see you on the other side of it. So you wanted to start with let's see, how politics is not a job, it's a duty. That's where you wanted to start with, right?
Yes, exactly. So I wanted to say, like, politics nowadays, it's kind of like a career, right? It's a bad thing. It's a really bad thing, because it led to crony capitalism and lobbying, and these are the problem with our society nowadays. Because well, I'm sorry, by the way, because my English is going to be pretty poor, I guess, because I'm French by nature. I mean,
that's okay.
I was born in France, and so the problem with crony capitalism and lobbying and all that is that it leads to the rise, right? It leads to, okay, what's the word with that? What's the word for that? It leads to, how do you say that? People can take advantage of that, right? Like, they're gonna buy off the politicians, and then they're gonna use it for themselves.
For sure.
And that's what the problem is with nowadays society, is that you can buy off a politician and he's gonna change the rules for you, and then it rigs the system, and that's how people get fucked.
Yeah, I agree with you. We're totally in agreement there, for sure. But what we should do first, Alexander, before we get too much into it, is, because the most important thing you can do when you're having any kind of conversation is everyone has to acknowledge the very fundamental basics of what we're discussing. So because we speak, like, even though you say you speak French, but with me you're speaking in English, and as with French, as with all languages, for us to be able to communicate with each other properly and articulate what we're trying to say, is the words that we use have predefined meanings, right?
Yeah.
That you can find in the dictionary.
Yeah.
Okay, so you accept that there, because some people believe that they can just make up and define meanings however they want to see fit. But you understand that we can't, I don't get to make the words sound how I want them to be. You don't get to make them. That we have to go by the defined meanings of the words, right?
Yeah.
Correct? So politics is the underlying foundation. What politics is basically people trying to argue, to give positions in how they should rule over people in a particular country.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I would preface, before we even start into the discussion, I will already preface, because I'm not sure if you understand what a libertarian is, but I am a philosophical libertarian. So instead of
sorry,
no problem, no worries. Instead of delving into politics, a philosopher, you take metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. Those things have to be foundational for our knowledge, for the base of our knowledge. And politics is, to me, already when you're talking about politics, politics is basically this pretense, whether it was in the old days, back in Europe in the old days, whether it was kings or monarchs, or in the Middle East, pharaohs, people that considered themselves government, at least most of the population recognized that there was no legitimacy.
The so-called ruling class that has
Right. But most
basically defined themselves as a ruling class, but yeah.
Yes. But most people recognized, you know, whether it was a king or a queen or a dictator, most people realized that their authority was built on force. It wasn't legitimate. It was never, people weren't following the orders of the king, the decrees of the kings, because they wanted to. They followed them out of fear of reprisal or retaliation or the king using force against them, right?
Yes. So, and it's usually self-declared,
right,
too.
Right. So when we talk about, and what we're talking about today in regards to politics, is in your country as well as mine, we now have, instead of kings and queens, we have what's called a democracy. In Canada, we have what's called a constitutional democracy. And, you know, in France, you know, you might have a little bit different. It's a republic, but they still...
Oh, it's the same thing.
Right, right. But it's still based on the premise of majority or mob rule.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Me, as a philosophical libertarian, before we delve into, like, because you want to say that it's not a job, it's a duty. But that, to me, when you say that, that is more or less suggesting that it's a duty to impose your will, your mandates, your edicts onto others. And I reject that completely. Just as the foundation of how you could have a peaceful society, I don't have a right to impose my will on you, whether through voting, whether as a minority or whether as a majority. To me, I don't have any legitimate authority to impose my will on you.
I understand that. So what you're saying is that we should not have any kind of mediation in the way we are living our lives, right?
No, mediation is fine. But as with, just like if you were in a family setting, which when you talk about government and the people, it's basically another concept such as a family type of setting where you have people that are setting the rules, right, of the household. And then in a family, it might be the mother and the father, and then the children all follow the rules. But for that to even work or function properly and to have well-adjusted children, just like in a society, everybody has to function under the exact same rules. There cannot be any exceptions to who has to follow the rules. It can't be that the parents say to the children, you can't steal, you can't hit your sister, you can't use force against other people. And then as the parent, if you use force against them, that's a contradiction, right? You know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, I agree completely with that. And that's kind of what I'm saying by duty. It's more like moralization of the people's life, but it's not something that should be enforced. It's something that should be educational. It's something that should be built on. Like, people should be gradually responsibilized. Like, that's what I'm trying to say. Like, I'm sorry, by the way, I'm not like used to debates and all that stuff. So I'm gonna be quite mediocre at that. And also, by my young age, I'm not exactly mature. But okay, so
hey, Alexander, before you continue on, you don't have to apologize. Yeah. I totally understand, okay. And the fact that you're willing to have this conversation tells me you're a young man that's willing to learn. So don't worry about a thing.
That's exactly why I'm doing it. I want to improve my views and become better at thinking. So continue on what you're saying. Sorry.
Okay, so basically, because I've understood things, what I suggest, when you talk about things in the philosophical aspect, you're looking at things from a macro, a big picture type of setting.
Yeah.
Politics tries to bring things down into the realm of, once again, like I said before, it was just people trying to argue over what's the best practices of how you rule over a country. My suggestion as a philosophical libertarian, and that builds upon, if you go all the way back to Aristotle, you know, there's many people, Plato, Socrates, you even go into the early 20th century with people like Ayn Rand that tried to create another philosophy called objectivism. Are you familiar with objectivism?
Not that one.
Okay. So basically what she tried to do is, because most of our conceptual beliefs in how people were governed or ruled over were predominantly built on forms of mysticism, right? So whether it was a king or a democracy, it's this whole pretense that there are certain people that get exceptions to morality. Whereas Ayn Rand, and nowadays there's a person called Stefan Molyneux. He's another one.
Oh, yeah.
So he's another one that has expanded upon this premise where we can take things outside of the mystical realm and create, just like with science, create a universally consistent ethic and moral behavior and habits, how people cohabit and coexist among each other without having a pretense where somebody gets exceptions to the rule. So Stefan Molyneux, he calls it UPB, universal preferential behavior. Ayn Rand called her philosophy objectivism. So it's trying to take it out of the mystical realm and make it more of a scientific, completely universal.
Okay. I completely agree with that. I think that science should be the main thing pushed on people. Everything should be ruled based on science and on facts. Like, we cannot rule things out of so-called ethics, which are made up by people, by the way. And I'm sorry, continue. Like, I want to say something, but I'm losing my track.
Oh,
I'm not really organized.
Okay, so basically go ahead.
It's just that when I was talking about the jobification, the careerification of politics, is that it has led to mediocrity, and it has led to people thinking that they're above everything. And that's exactly what you're saying, that you cannot have someone make the rules and not abide to them. And there should be value for... What I'm saying is that there are now there are people that are entering politics out of duty. They think that this world is wrong and that there should be change. Like, have you seen the Justice Democrats new video? Like, a lot of people that see all of what's wrong. Like, I know I say Democrats, they're pretty bad, but the new kind of Democrats that are coming up, the progressives, the so-called progressive, I don't like this word, by the way, and because it can be used by anyone, and it is used under false pretenses. But there are truly progressive people, and what I call progressive myself is people that want improvement for the human race and for all humans. It's not about self-preferences or it's not about themselves. It's about making other people's lives better. And there are lots of new politicians that are coming up and that don't come from this ruling class and that are for improvement of everyone's lives. And I suggest that you look at the video of the Justice Democrats that they put. It's mainly women, but it's not about feminism or that bullshit. It's about making things, I guess, right again, but it's just about not taking advantage of people anymore.
Okay, and I understand what you're saying, but this is the beautiful thing about the difference between using governance as a means to an end or using just education as a means to an end. So what you're suggesting is it's basically two contradictory methods in how to implement your reason, your thought process. So me, just like I say, I'll break it down to, because basically society and government, you can basically correlate that with, like I say, a family setting with the parents and the children. So basically I can teach my children the fundamental principles of what it means to be a person that can cohabitate, coexist, have social and economic interactions with other people, where everything is based on voluntary exchange and mutually agreed to terms, right? That's something that we could all,
Exactly.
and that's something that is universally consistent in its moral and its ethics. So nobody can reject that because everybody would like to function without somebody forcing their will on them, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so with politics, the people that you're suggesting, these Democrats, as far as I'm concerned,
I mean, for me, they're not really Democrats. Like the new the they are separated. They just have to do it because there are only two parties in the U.S. But they're really not like Democrats, like the ones that we've been having. Like with when I say with, because I feel like the United States politics is important to everyone in the world because it has effects on everyone in the world. That's why I'm interested in it, and that's why I'm willing to talk about it because I think it impacts me. It impacts me directly, even though I'm French and I'm living in Canada. It's not this, but I feel it impacts me because it will have effects on the world entirely.
for sure. So anyways, I didn't mean, so whether they call themselves Democrats, to me that the terminology they use doesn't matter because as you must understand, people that want to win the political realm, they use a lot of sophistry as a pretense. So they say words that sound nice, but but when you actually get down to understand what they mean, it's whether how it performs in reality. So there's concepts that you can drive in your mind, but how do you implement them in reality? So my biggest question would be to these people that want to affect changes, if you do it through the political realm without using, if you don't change now, to me, politics is downstream of culture. So if you want to affect people properly, you have to change the culture of the people. You have to change the way they think. If you use politics as a means to an end, that's basically just people that want to take over. A terminology I use for government is the gun in the room, because the government represents force, right? So instead of telling, like, I can affect people's habits and behaviors if I hold a gun to their head, but it's not a proper way because the minute they perceive that you don't have that ability to threaten them, they might act out immorally on their own.
Yeah.
So laws have never prevented criminals from being criminals. Laws have never prevented crimes from happening because most people that are immoral or are evil in nature or just have evil tendencies, they don't care about laws. So to me, it's all about personal accountability and holding each individual to account and people having the voluntary choice. So let's say these people you suggest, these Democrats, let's say they want to create some part, let's say it's even in France or Canada, the US, let's say they want to buy a big parcel of land and they want to create a setting where you can opt into this particular place where they go, and they've set up whatever you want to call it, a small mini democracy or a communist state or a socialist state or whatever they want to do, as long as everybody that goes to that area, as long as they agree to the contract, if they agree, okay, I agree that you can take this from me, or you. Now, if it's entered into a contract voluntarily, I'm not against. I don't care if you want to do socialism, communism, capitalism, democracy, whatever you want to do.
I'm not for any of these, by the way.
Right. I understand it. Like, I'm not because to me, and this is what a libertarian is, and this is what the U.S., the founding fathers of the United States, what they recognized early on is all concepts of governance, even from, like I say, even in old Europe, the democracies of Greece or Rome, they all represented the sacrifice of the individual for the greater good. Yeah. Right? The American experience, the founding fathers, as a result of the Enlightenment era and the recognition that the greatest minority, the smallest minority on the planet is the individual, the whole pretense, the whole philosophy behind the American founding fathers was to recognize and respect and uphold the individual as the highest authority. So a person as an individual, you are your own authority. Because I am as an individual and I have the right to be free of force, to be free of theft, I have the right, as long as I don't impose my will and my mandates or my edicts, I have the right to live however I see fit. That was the pretense of the American founders, and what has happened is, through the culmination of 200 years, is they've basically gone back to a quasi form of collectivism. What they call today is a third way. So they've taken the capitalist model and the socialist model, and this is basically what happens all over the Western world now, is they've amalgamated both of them together. So you got the producers in society that are producing the income, the wealth, and then you have the collectivists, so whether they're socialists, communists, or fascists, that look to use force as a pretense to redistribute that wealth. So the whole problem with when you talked about originally the concept we were going to talk about originally with politics is not necessarily a job, it's a duty. The problem is, once again, it suggests that it is a duty to use the government as a means to force your preferences, your mandates, or your edicts on others. Whereas I would suggest, rather than politics, like I say, the best thing to help people is to educate them. Education, giving people proper knowledge and information, is the best way. And instead of using politics, because like I say, politics is a representation of government, and because government is a representation of force, force is not a proper way. Now, like I said, it's easily to deduce it down to like a family setting. Now, when I was raising my children, I have 2 sons, I could have used force as a means to make sure they did what I said, but then, but they would have never grown to be self-reliant, responsible, moral human beings. They would have accepted, and they would have started adopting some of those bad practices of trying to force or impose their preferences on others. So what I did with my children, I raised them by leading by example, by giving them, you know, proper morals and ethics, and educating them so that they will not be easily swayed to become serfs or subjects or slaves to some ruling class. To me, that's the way to do it. Now, that is something that I would define is a duty. If you want to live in a place where you want to have peaceful cohabitants that coexist and mingle with each other socially and economically, if you want to have that done peacefully, where everything is done voluntarily, it's not that you have a duty to rule them, but you should take it upon yourself as a duty to help educate, inform, and enlighten them.
No, but that was exactly where I was going. Like when I was saying it's a duty to show the way to people. It's not a duty to become a politician. It's a duty to show what's wrong and show the example. And the fact that it has now become a career to become a politician, and that now things are done in a scholar way and everything is in a kind of a cycle, you know? And everything is not going anywhere because everything is done the same way. The politicians, they all come from the same schools and everything. They don't know about other people's lives, by the way. They don't know about other people's lives, but they don't know what we're living. Like when I say what we're living, like the normal people, they have no idea of people's difficulties in lives. And these people that I talked about, these are people that suffered from these policies and from these governments, and they're showing the way by changing, trying to change and show the example. And that's exactly how it is a duty to me. Like it's not about becoming a politician just as a duty to change your country. It's a duty. It kind of trickles down from showing the way. And before chiefs and all that, they were chiefs and rulers, I guess. Like back in the before Renaissance, before Middle Age, all that, they were chiefs. They were tribe chiefs, and it kind of looks like the family settings that you were talking about. They were the village chief who was organizing the village, and they were leading the wars. They were fighting. They were themselves farmers. Sometimes they were part of the community. And now the thing is that politicians nowadays, they're not part of the community themselves. They're kind of separated from normal people, I guess. I'm gonna say normal people, but I really mean the pleb. Like I'm gonna call us the pleb, but they don't have any idea of how life goes in the pleb, and so they cannot make decisions for the pleb because they don't live that life. And what decisions, the decisions they're gonna make, they will not have any meaning and they will only serve themselves, because nowadays politics is only about not individualism, but it's about it's something. Sorry, I'm at loss for words. It's something that is quite personal. Like everything, it comes from a personal point of view, and when you're not a part of the community as a whole, like you're gonna make personal things, but where they come from is from the rich families and everything like that, and they're only gonna do things for these rich families and for their environment. They're not gonna do things for the people that are living under them, because they don't know these people. They don't know what life is for these people.
Yes. Well, I just to touch down on the first part of what you were pointing out is when you were talking about like politicians or as a duty. Once again, we have to discern the difference between someone that's a leader and someone who's a ruler, because there are very, very important differences to a leader and a ruler. A ruler has the so-called pretense of authority where they can mandate to you, right? So use force or compulsion. Whereas a leader, a proper leader, you can ask people to follow you and do the kind of things you ask of them, but you have no pretense of authority over them.
A leader is naturally elected, while a ruler self-declares himself as a stepping stone, like as a ruler. Right? Is that what you mean by that?
Well, actually, in a way, I'm gonna help you here a little bit. This might be a little disturbing, because depending on the education you've got, you've probably never heard this explained to you in a proper sense. But even the concept now, because we're educated in our public education system, which are basically run through the government, and most of European and even North American education systems are a result of adoption of the Prussian model. Mm-hmm. Okay, and the problem, when they implemented this, what they basically did was create another fictional concept. So the whole pretense of government, they tell you it's all about voting and democracy, and the people choose who their rulers or their leaders are going to be. But in reality, if you use, like I said, if you use the concepts that are understood and derived of objective reality, of using logically consistent, universally ethical habits and behaviors, then you would easily understand that even the very pretense of democracy is built upon a false concept, built upon mysticism. So how you can best explain that? So you know yourself, so people suggest that when you go to the ballot box and you vote for a politician, they suggest that that is part of the social contract. So that gives these people, these political actors, these politicians or these political parties, some sense of legitimacy to rule over a particular, whether it's a province or whether it's a country. I can prove with just a few questions that that's actually an impossibility. It's built on pure mysticism.
Oh, I guess you're saying that because I said naturally elected, but when I mean naturally elected, it's not in the way that we're electing people nowadays. It's just that we see someone as a leader and we follow him, and we understand that he's the rightful person to follow, and that he's going to lead us to success. It's not someone that is elected because he has presented himself in a race or something like that, or it's just that we as humans, we see kind of like in the wildlife setting, like when there is the lion, the dominant lion that leads the troop. Like it's just that we fall under someone that has the authority, but the natural authority to lead us. That's what I mean by natural election.
Right. In some way, though, I kind of understand what you're saying, but when you correlate human activities with the animal kingdom, we can't go back to the state of nature either, because in that kind of scenario, without objective morality and universally consistent ethics, then it would be just a matter of who's the strongest, right? So we don't even so we can't go that way either, because what we've like I say, what we've learned as an adoption of the post-Enlightenment era understanding of philosophy. And what you were saying earlier about the plebs, that perfectly correlates and ties in with, are you familiar with Adam Smith?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm familiar.
Right. So Adam Smith said basically the same thing what you were saying earlier with what they call the invisible hand, which is called the free market. And all a free market represents are people, because the market is just people. So people that are free from force and coercion, they get to choose individually. All of them, they get to choose what's most beneficial for them as far as social economic activities, and all the transactions or exchanges are done on a voluntary means. And the beautiful thing about that is, like you said, there's no central planner that can figure out what millions and millions of people need or want or require, because it's something that can change minute by minute, day by day, person by person. You know, it's constantly changing depending on a person's particular individual situation. So the invisible hand, when people say we need governance, what governance truly means, it's also the thing of, have you ever used eBay?
Yeah, like I mostly use Amazon, but yeah.
Okay, so on eBay, there is no such thing as a central planning government, but there is regulations, there is accountability, there are rules to the game, and the people that don't function under those rules, well, they see with their reputation, the people will not deal with them by sheer fact. If you see someone that has a poor reputation, well, you would automatically know instinctively, I don't want to deal with those people. Yeah. That's the beautiful thing about a free market. Whereas a government, when they mandate a regulation, all that has to happen over that, as a consequence of that, and this is where we'll tie into where you were saying about bringing up lobbying, if a government creates some regulation in a particular portion of the society or the economy, then there's corporations, there's business people that will lobby that particular government for favor or to exempt them from the rules. And that's where, once again, that's where governance is actually, it's detrimental to actually holding people to account.
Yeah, and that natural regulation is exactly what being a libertarian is, right? Exactly. So that's the proper way the world should be, and that's the regulation should not be done by a ruling class, but by the people themselves as individuals. That's exactly. So we rejoice there. And there is, by the way, something that they're trying to push right now, which is MMT, the money, what's it called again? The monetary of. Sorry, my computer thing. You know what MMT is, right? Okay. Yeah, just one sec. I just want to have the exact definition of it. And it's basically when they have this fiat money and the government decides what to give to people, but there would be it would be good in a way, but as always, since we have corrupt politicians, we cannot have this happen because there is going to be abuse again. And by the way, I wanted to say earlier, but that abuse is what is slowing human evolution. Like abuse is the worst of the sins. Like it's the worst sin ever that a human could have, because abuse is what leads to. It's what has led to our situation nowadays. Is that just as you were saying, we cannot go back to the white life because the strongest would impose their will on others. But that's exactly what's happening right now. Is that the strongest, aka the richest, are exactly imposing their will on us and are slowing. Like they're not even slowing; they're preventing others to have freedom in order for them to stay strong.
I agree. And, you know, when you talk about this is why I've had this discussion, and a lot of times it's just a matter of some people are speaking from an ideological perspective, so they're unwilling to think. You're coming across as someone that's not like that, so I'm very appreciative of that. Because when I talk about these things with people that, even people that do promote socialism or communism, what I keep pointing out to them on a constant, ongoing basis is, to me, as a libertarian, as a philosophical libertarian, it's not that I want to create a one-size-fits-all. I do not believe that what I have preference for is going to be suitable for everybody. So
I agree.
So for me, if people like I said that I prefaced earlier when we were discussing this is, if people want to create something like a commune or a socialist endeavor where everybody has, accumulates or assumes a role and a responsibility in a collective endeavor, like I say, as long as it's done voluntarily, I don't care. But what happens when you have governance and people, what I see from people usually from the left side of the political spectrum, they always say, well, no, it's corporations that are to blame. But what I always try to point out to people is corporation, the very term corporation is an act of legislation by government.
Yeah, I really liked your video on that, by the way.
Oh, thank you very much. Because without government, there's no such thing as a corporation that has limited or no liability for the actual owner. Now, I have owned business myself, and when I opened my business, it's called a sole proprietor, which means I am solely responsible for anything that happens in my business. So if I screwed over my customers, I am going to be held to account. To me, that's the way it should be. But because governments created this legislation where people can, cause a lot of economic and social damage to millions of people, and then they don't actually. Well, as you know, the crash of 2008.
Yeah, and it's coming back, by the way. They're deregulating again. Like, it's crazy, but go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. But as you know, what should have happened, and I'm not saying that I would have been happy to see a lot of people have to suffer socially or economically, but what should have happened should have been the people that carried out these malicious acts or deeds or did these evil things. They should have been held to account. But once again, because of this collectivization and this kind of forced subjugation of governance, they offloaded all that responsibility on people that were not participants in the bad. So me, as a human being, me as a person, I've never done anything to economically or socially enslave anybody. But I'm going to have to be forced through taxation to pay for all of the bad deeds of these evil people, whether it's...
And these people are still free, by the way. They're still free. They're still, like, living the good life. They're still doing the same thing, and it's going to happen again. These people, like, when you say they should be held accountable, I think that these people deserve death penalty. The politicians that permitted that and the people that abused this system. That's the only way that we can stop it. They all deserve death penalty because their effects this had effect on the entire world.
Well, see that, and that's perfectly why, and the American experience and the American philosophy, why it was so important that it was the only place on the entire planet that rejected the democracy model where everybody's enslaved to everybody. It was it was the respect of the individual, and if we still lived under. I'm in Canada, so we don't have that individualistic kind of mentality and philosophy, unfortunately. But because we're north of our neighbors to the U.S. and we get a lot of their media, Canadians, we understand what the philosophical underpinnings of the social experiment that's called the United States. We understand what it's all about. So we kind of adopt it just by sheer fact that we have close proximity geographically to our U.S. neighbor. We kind of adopt a lot of the philosophical understandings, even through our courts. The problem is when you have this pretense of governance that's through democracy, that no individual actors are held to account. And this is the problem that, like I said, it's the most important thing that we can really discuss is getting away from collectivization of guilt and collectivization of whether it's like the fruits of the labor or the products of your intellect or the products of what you provide society. We have to respect the individual. So if an individual, like someone like, say, Bill Gates, as long as he's not forcing or imposing, his product or service on someone, he can become as enriched. People say, oh, he's terrible because he's so rich. I have that's an envy. That's speaking from envy and resentment. To me, as long as he made his money through voluntary exchange because people wanted to consume his product or his service, I'm completely okay with that. I have no problem with wealth disparity. What I do have a problem with is when the politicians, the political class, those in government, they can plunder the incomes of the poor. And people, when they say, oh, we need higher taxes, what they don't what they leave out of that equation is it's going to be thrust upon the poorest people, because the rich people, the 1%ers, the 0.01%ers, they've already lobbied government so that they don't have to pay these taxes, and they have the power, they have the lawyers, they have all kinds of ways to avoid
all the loopholes,
right? So
in
they
the laws.
exactly, so they don't have any accountability. Once again, it's always thrust upon the lowly taxpayer, because they have no capacity, they have no ability to fight against government, which is why, to me, it kind of upsets me when I hear people that are mostly socialists or communists is, listen, stop promoting your particular form of government. Join us libertarians and say, listen, if you want to create a socialist endeavor somewhere or a communist endeavor, if you want to try that out, I think it'll fail. But if you want to try it, you can go ahead and do it. But you can't force me to pay for it, and you can't force me to participate. If we would get back to some semblance of freedom, some semblance of a free market, then there'd be all kinds of experiments. What I've used in the past is, here's a perfect example. Let's say we were all trying to play a board game. Okay? The best way you would learn about what the best rules for the board game would be not for everyone to try to force their preferences on how you play the board game, is have 10 different people, to have 10 different groups playing 10 different games, and you will automatically see, without no force, no compulsion, no violence involved, you will see which one is going to work out most beneficial to everyone, because it will be the one where everybody will want to congregate to, because they'll recognize that the rules are universal. You know, if you know one group is playing a game where there's 2 people out of the group of 10 that don't have to abide by the rules, well, you're not going to want to play that game.
No.
But
yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, but if you see a game where they're all playing the same game, everyone is held to account, everyone has the equal opportunity to play the game, but there is no pretense, this is another thing, is there's no pretense of an equal outcome. So there's still going to be such thing as winners or losers, or people who learn to play the game better. But as long as it's done voluntarily, and you can choose to play the game or you can choose to walk away from the game, to me, that's fine. And there's never going to be a pretense. When people talk about equality of outcome, the only way you can create equality of outcome is if you stifle or you restrict those people who have better natural tendencies, capabilities, or competence.
Yeah, by the way, I want to add to that the reason why we have such governance nowadays is because there is a lack of confidence. People have a lack of confidence in themselves to rule themselves. Because if people trusted themselves and thought they were the least bit intelligent, they would know that it regulates itself automatically. And that's the same for drugs and all that. We've seen that for drugs, like Portugal. Portugal made everything legal. And at first people people abused it, but then people learned. And now they don't have any problem with dependence and all that. It's the country that has some of the least dependence and addiction, because the people have learned through experimentation to rule them, to control themselves.
Right. No, I agree. Well, like I say, it goes to the same thing.
Yeah, it goes to the same thing.
Whereas you have the capacity for each individual to be held to account as participants in social economic activity. Governance takes away all of that. So it's just a matter of politics. It's just a matter of people clamoring for the gun in the room so that they can take it over and aim it at their opponents or people they perceive as their political opposition. And to me, you know, when any kind of situation, in any kind of relationship, whether it's, like I say, whether it's family, whether it's societal, any kind of relationship that is built on using force against each other is not going to be beneficial to everyone, because everybody is going to be, because human beings, it's implanted in our psychology to have fight or flight. So if there's violence or force imposed upon you, you're either going to want to take over and assume that role yourself so you can use that violence towards others, or you're going to try to escape from having to deal with that influence, which makes you not a proper participant in the society or in the economy. So once again, it goes back to just having everyone have the capacity to not have a pretense of authority over each other, but a pretense of being voluntary participants in social economic exchange. We've already, you know what, the beautiful thing about us living today in 2018 is about 95% of most of everything we do, every one of us on a daily basis, 95% probably at least of the things we do every day is done voluntarily. When you're hanging around with your friends, you don't you know, if you want to go to McDonald's, you don't steal your buddy's wallet and say you got to pay for me. You ask, or they offer, and it's a voluntary exchange, and it happens naturally, and there's no conflict that you have to resolve as a result of that. Whereas we have there's a few areas of the society now that have been taken over, and they constantly try to encroach. So now we're seeing more and more where they're trying to take over the economic sphere in regards to politics. The whole pretense of even having a government back in the day, especially when the U.S. founders set up their Constitution, was the role of the federal government was limited to protection from external forces or influence, so other governments, right? Mm-hmm. And how you do that, there's multiple ways you can do that, but the way the U.S. set up originally was to have militias. So rather than having a standing army, because a standing army, once again, is going to be required a forceful way to redistribute income. So for you to have an army, you're going to have to steal money from the taxpayers and then pay this military. Whereas if you had people that are called militias, everybody in every community knew that for your community to remain free, everyone had to come together, be trained to be able to operate and own a weapon, and be able to defend their community, their state, and ultimately their country against foreign aggression. Now, the country that has maintained that pretense for a long time and is much better as far even than the U.S. is Switzerland. Now, Switzerland doesn't have necessarily a standing army, but what they do have is half of the population is trained and they're armed. So they have,
I know that.
And they remain neutral. So if there's any conflicts around the world, they don't get actively involved. So that automatically does two things. One, it makes sure that you have a lot less people that are trying to have conflict with you, because if you're not causing force or coercion or theft on other people in other countries, well, they're not going to try to retaliate against you. And by having a well-armed population, you have that explicit underlying premise that I have the capacity to defend myself, whether it's by a domestic, a government that's trying to get tyrannical, or a foreign influence or a foreign entity or a foreign government that's trying to take it over. So the best thing you can do, even when people say, oh, we need government for military or for defense. No, what you need is people that are willing to defend their country. It doesn't have to come as a result of some pretense of having a ruling class. It's just a matter of people willing. I don't need someone to tell me that I should protect my backyard.
No,
I know that instinctively, and so do most people. If you care about freedoms, you know instinctively that your freedom relies on your ability to defend yourself.
Yeah. So the key to everything is decentralization. It's the fact that we even when you have the justice separated from the military, from the economics, it's still too centralized, and it's exactly what you're saying. We're coming down again to it, but it's. If everyone, as individuals, took responsibility for what they were doing, that we would not have the problems that we were having now. So yeah, I think we've pretty much said everything about it for that topic. I'm sorry, I'm stuttering, but if you want to move on to the views on drugs, which is gonna go back again to some of what we've said, but it's quite interesting. I think the history of drugs and how they were used and all of that.
Yeah, if you want to go ahead, Alexander, you go ahead, and then I'll follow up after. Or if you want me to go ahead, it's up to you.
Okay, so drug history, like before the 50s, before prohibition, which is again like it's they imposed their will on others, and it has led to quite bad things nowadays, by the way. But before that, before the 50s, drugs, in particular marijuana, was legal everywhere. It wasn't legal because legal is something made up by the government. what is legal or not. It was just available, and people were using it, or they were free to use it or not. And if they weren't using it, it was their choice, right? And what they've done is that they put on prohibition. And before they did prohibition on alcohol and all that. But to be quite honest, alcohol is the worst thing you could put into your body. And the fact that it's now free and legal, and by the way, it was owned by the mafia, and so now it's quite legal. And guess who had the monopoly on that? It was the mafia themselves. But whatever. The thing is that with the history of drugs, it's just that it was done to persecute. How do you say that? To persecute a category of people, which was black and Latinos, for no reason, by the way, because whites used to use drugs as much as the blacks and Latinos. It's just that they wanted to persecute a category of people to undermine them and to control them better, because they didn't want them in their country. Even though, by the way, it doesn't make any sense that they would do that, because they're not even native. Like I guess I'm striving away from the subject, but white people aren't native from the North America. It was taken away from the Indians, so it doesn't, like when you're saying we don't want blacks or anything in our country, like it doesn't make any sense, because you aren't even from that country in the first place. So the best thing that would be that you let everyone come, and everyone that wants to do something to advance in the country.
Right. Okay, so there's a couple things we'll have to touch on. So as far as drugs go, because once again, because I'm a philosophical libertarian, and to me, all rights, well, they're correlated. You also have the other side of the equation, which requires responsibility. But rights are, as far as I'm concerned, there's no such thing as a positive right. The only rights that I recognize are negative rights. So the negative right means you are free from force, coercion, theft, compulsion, right? So you have so drugs and guns, all that stuff enters into the equation. So it doesn't matter if you're brown, black, white, or First Nations, Aboriginal. Drugs, as we all understand, is just people, whether you grow it, cultivate it, whether you distribute it, or whether you consume it. All of those transactions happen voluntarily. So if someone goes to buy some drugs off of a drug dealer, it's a voluntary exchange. No force was introduced. So that is something that should not have anything to do with someone else having any express permission or authority to intervene in that activity. That should be completely prohibited.
It's just a way to control people.
Right. So as far as that goes, like I say, it's just a matter, as long as the exchange happens voluntarily, even with sexual habits and behaviors. If people want to, if people want to, men want to have sex with men, women want to, I don't care. Like, that's all. If they want to do it voluntarily, it does not break, and it doesn't interject in the proper principles. It's completely consistent with universal morals and ethics as far as using force. So I don't care as far as the drugs. Now, what I will say is, when you were bringing up the colonization, which is something that I've actually made a couple videos in the past regarding this, because I am from Canada, and because our public education system, it actually fails us tremendously, and it would do a much better job helping the First Nations people if we weren't taught with this stupid way of thinking. But it creates this concept of white guilt, right, or this collective guilt. Now,
there shouldn't be guilt. Like, it should just authorize anyone to do whatever they want. Like, there shouldn't be separations between countries, by the way, and people should be able to move wherever they want. It's again the free will thing. But I'll continue. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay, man. No worries. But what I was saying. So basically. So when it comes to, when you say the problem where I think we have to clarify things a little bit here. So what you're taught in school is these colonizers, these people that came from Europe, came and they took over, the country of Canada, and now the First Nations people more or less were treated as subjects or slaves or serfs. The problem I see with that is it completely negates and it eliminates the very real fact that before white people came to North America, there were competing tribes that were doing the same thing. They were warring, they were factions against each other, trying to lay claim or stake to large parcels of geographical landmass that they didn't actually do anything with. Now, my pretense, just like with you, I agree. Now, if we lived in an ideal setting, there would be no such thing as geographical country borders, like borders as far as countries. But the problem with when you talk about like the First Nations people as far as owning the land, there's just like with the British or the French, I reject the very concept that the British or the French had any claim of authority that they could say that, okay, I own Canada. But I have to. But if I'm going to be universally consistent in my ethics and my morality, I have to say it's the same thing for the First Nations people. Now, if you had a place where you had your own little land set up, you had your cultivation, you had horticulture, you had whatever you were doing, maybe you had a house built on that, maybe it was land where you used for your animals to graze, nobody has the right to take that from you. But no gang, no group, no government, no First Nations, nobody gets to lay claim to the entire continent of North America. That's where I think we need to be more clear and concise in our language, is that nobody can lay claim to an entire geographical area.
No. But the difference with that is that with tribes, when they were on the land, is that it was self-regulatory again, because it wasn't important enough to make a real change. Oh yeah, actually no, because I've done a history of Quebec, and I know that one of the tribes before the whites arrived, when I say the whites, I mean the Europeans. One of the tribes was about to overtake the continent, and so not the continent, but a good part of it, and the other tribes under its control, and it was the most fierce tribe, I believe. I don't remember exactly their name. I believe it's Algonquins or something like that. Yeah, they were the ones that were about to overtake everyone, right? But what is what's the word for it again? What is bothering me in that story is the way that it was done. It was through trickery and through false pretenses that they took over, and that's quite bad. But it's past, and we should forget things like that. When I'm saying we should forget, I'm gonna get hate for that, but I don't care. But we should forget past that was like, when I say we should forget, we should not forget it in a way that we don't recognize what happened, but we evolve from it. We should go beyond it. We should use past to evolve.
Right. Well, what I think the most important thing, what we need to do, and what should be, like I say, this is the failure of our education system, but what should be taught to people is that these things that happened in the past, you have to be able to discern the difference. But here's the problem. See, the fact that our governments they're the ones that set up our education system. So you're not going to come out of our education system getting the proper knowledge, because it's not in their interest to give you the proper knowledge. No. But what should be taught is the simple fact that there were some people from Europe that came over here and were authoritarian in nature, wanted to make a new land where they could dominate and control more people and plunder their incomes. But the difference is, see, this is the problem with using collective guilt and collectivization is, I'm a perfect example. So my history is Irish and Scottish. That's where my family tree goes back to, is Ireland and Scotland. So when my ancestors came to Canada, it was never as someone that wanted to take over or impose their will, mandates, or edicts or anything. It was people that were fleeing oppression from the British monarchies, right? So
they were searching for a better life.
Right. So we came here, my great-great-great-great-grandparents, they came here. They never looked to take over anyone else's, and what they usually ended up doing is they bought a piece of land off of someone else, and they made that land They cultivated it, you know, they built houses on it. So, and every human being on the planet has a right to have somewhere to live and to provide for their family. So that's a right, once again, that's universally consistent. What I reject, once again, so we have to discern the difference between someone that just has a right to property, to have, you know, to be someone that has the right to live and flourish and on this planet, or what we need to reject is this pretense where there are certain people, so like a tribe's leader, a chief, or someone in government. We have to reject all of these people that put forth this pretense that they have authority over everyone else. Because I actually used to deliver into a place called Two Nations Crossing in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Now, they have the same kind of corruptions. It's just more localized because they are not as big of a demographic as a lot of the white people. But they have the same thing where I'd hear a lot of people in these communities where
it's the same thing.
Yeah, it's this small portion, like these big tribal chiefs, that they take all this money that they get from the federal government, they redistribute it to how they see fit. But the people, just the regular people on these First Nation communities, are still treated like second-class citizens. They're still taught, and let me point out one other thing, and I'll tie this up. But another thing that I see is a massive failure for a lot of these First Nations community, and I recognize this because I understand things from the philosophical level, is they still teach their people that same concept of forced subjugation, so the sacrifice for the greater good. What I've understood in almost every country around on the planet is whenever you put forth the pretense, it sounds good in theory, so, we sacrifice the individual for the greater good, but when you break down what the greater good means, there's no such thing. That's not anything that's objectively true in reality, because there's good people, there's bad people, there's people in between. So the First Nations community, they still have this same kind of moral concept or moral dilemma where they believe it's all about sacrificing for the group, for the collective, for the commune. But that's why a lot of the people in their communities they lack self-esteem. They lack personal responsibility because they're not taught properly. If you constantly tell people that you're victims, right, and that's the only thing you can do is subject yourself to a ruling class, so whether it's your First Nations leaders or to democracy, then once again you're not giving them the proper philosophy and the proper intellect and the proper self-respect where they would have ambition to exceed more than what they've taught to be. Most of them have taught that they're just serfs. They're just cogs in the big machine of governance, and that's a terrible thing. If I raise my children, same thing. It goes back to, once again, even in the family, if I raise my children to think that the only thing that they got to offer in the world is to sacrifice themselves for their family, well, they're not going to have the proper self-esteem to be amazing, ambitious, self-reliant, moral actors.
Yeah, by the way, even in the family setting, there is a problem because you cannot feel responsible for what your parents or your grandparents have done. Like you should be feeling responsible for what you're doing as a person. So individualism, even in the family setting, is important.
Yes, I agree.
Because like even for the segregation thing and everything like that, because I'm from the Caribbean, right? And I have a part of my family that owned slaves. And I have a part of my family that were slaves. But I don't feel responsible for any part of them.
And you shouldn't.
No, I shouldn't. I feel responsible for what I'm doing now. And what I'm doing now is I'm trying to be a part of a better world. And that's why I'm having this talk with you. That's why I'm having this talk with anyone I can. Like I've not done any talk as the one I'm doing now, but when I try to discuss with people, I'm trying to make them aware of these things. Yes, and I'm trying to make the world better that way. That people should feel responsible for what they're doing, right? Like you should fight for what you think is right, and that's all that matters. And when you're not doing anything and you're just looking at things, and you can say, oh, you're not doing anything, you're just talking about it. No, I'm doing something about it by talking about it.
Well, talking actually is the best way to deal with things because we live, just like if you go back to the Enlightenment era, right? So prior to the Enlightenment era, and you even go back to the
which comes from France, by the way. I love that, but yeah.
Yeah. So you know, prior to the Enlightenment era and during the Dark era, the Dark Ages, people still believed in, well, this rule by force, this rule by decree, by the king. You know, that God hands his power down to this king. But the problem is, once again, it was that whole concept of the sacrifice of the individual. But people, as a result of the Enlightenment era, people come to learn and understand that we don't have to function in that way anymore. And what I like to expand upon, especially for young people like yourself, what's so important is the Gutenberg press, which was an amazing invention, and hundreds of years out now we can look back on those days and say, yes, those were defining times in human history where it brought humanity out of, instead of our infantile stages of what it is to be free human beings, it brought us, I would say, as if we were like into the teenage years. So we started understanding what it really means to respect individual freedoms and rights. So it brought us that far. Now in 2018, we now live in what I've coined the phrase, I call it Enlightenment Era 2.0, because instead of the Gutenberg press, we now have access to information from all of the greatest knowledge that's ever been espoused by all the greatest thinkers in all of history. It's at your fingertips today, right? And I have a picture on my screen right now that says, in the age of information, ignorance is a choice. So there's no excuse anymore. We can go from the teenage years where we thought where we needed democracies or governance or central planning or socialists or communists. We now can move beyond that. We should be able to move beyond that because we understand things philosophically. We understand universally consistency. We understand science. We understand. We understand all the proper morals and ethics. We get to stand on the shoulders of philosophical and intellectual geniuses in the past, and now build and expand upon this. Whereas central planners, they're trying to take us back. They're trying to take us back into.
Yeah, that's why they're trying to regulate the internet, by the way. They're trying to cut us off.
Yes, for sure, because they know that, well, they know exactly, just like you and I know. They know that if we truly get to affect this kind of change, then maybe by your generation or maybe your kids' generation, and which is why it's so important that I wanted to talk to you, because especially you, because you're a younger gentleman, and you're like, I have two sons that are of your same age. You guys are the future. I need you people I need you young people to understand these things, and it sounds like you're very wise, so that's, I'm very positive already to know that, but I need you young people to pick up that torch and to be good leaders as well, so you can help, because if you take advantage, if you don't use information like what we're doing. You said we're talking. Well, this is the best way to do it, because absent of talking, there's only two options if you're not talking with each other. The other is forcing your will on others and walking away completely. And the other two options are no good as far as having a healthy, prosperous, and free society. The best way, that's why freedom of speech is more important than everything. If we have the ability, like you and I do, to talk, even if we might have differences in our particular preferences, as long as we recognize that, okay, you might choose to want to do it this way, you might want to choose, as long as we respect each other's individual autonomy and our freedoms, then I don't care what you want to do, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to say. Communication is evolution, and information too. Like, and the thing is, I read Orwell not long ago. Like, because I've never read it before. I used to read a lot when I was a kid, but I never came upon it. I read Brave New World when I was 10 years old, but I never read 1984. And when I discovered this book a few days ago, like a week or two ago, I was amazed, because that's exactly what they're doing. And even the press, what we were talking about, the what's it called again, the creation of the press to write, right? Yeah, the Gutenberg press. I'm sorry about that. Is that when it came up, like communication was better. Like, you could write about things, and then they controlled that. It's Orwellian. They controlled what was written, and they changed history in their favor, and they changed information in their favor, and then you had control of the freedom of speech. And then there was the television, and television, you could speak about what was wrong and all that, and they controlled that too. Now there is internet, and there is communication everywhere, but they're trying to control that too. But where the point is about internet is that we have all this information, but we're so distracted by everything. And my generation is I kind of hate my generation, by the way, because we're all stuck in that loop of looking at what others are doing instead of looking at what we're doing, and instead of taking responsibility of what we're doing, we're just looking at other people's lives for no reason. Like we're wasting our lives looking at other people's lives. Like you're not doing anything when you're looking at a rich guy in his car. Like you're not doing anything for yourself. You could work your way to become like that guy, but you're looking at him. So what are you doing?
Yes,
Right?
and you know what? And that stuff. This is something that each generation. Trust me, Alexandre. It's not just your generation. Each generation has got to go through this. But I will admit your generation has things a little bit worse because it's the culmination. So as with everything, so you know, even Canada, U.S. when they started out founding these governments, they started out limited in nature. But as we all know, power corrupts and absolute corrupts absolutely. So given enough time and enough generations, that's why people in the past could make predictions. They're not necessarily always accurate with 100% certainty, but the reason why people in the past can make predictions because humans have a certain pattern and we work off of certain incentives. So your generation, it's unfortunate that you're just because like I say, my two sons are of your generation as well. It's unfortunate that you guys happen to be coming to age at a time when things are going through. It's like I say, it's basically as if you were a kid growing up and your parents are now going through a really, really, really bad divorce. It's very, very difficult. But what the best thing, like I keep trying to tell young people from your generation, is listen to people and you get information from many different sources. That's the one thing I would say. Don't just listen to like libertarians or conservatives or.
No, I'm trying to listen to everyone. Really, I've come through a long way. But where I was trying, I didn't finish exactly where I was going. Is that now we've passed? I think we're passing through that teenage years. Like when how you're calling it? Like I think like people are realizing now the tool that they have in their hand, and now we're trying to communicate for the greater good. Like people are kind of shifting away from all these nonsense that we're looking at all the time. It's not the same thing anymore. I see more and more people talking about what matters on social media. Social media used to be only for the stupid and for the pointless stuff, but now it's for sharing what is wrong. And I think the shift is coming, and it's gonna be bad for the ruling class. It's gonna be bad for them, and that's. And we're gonna arrive on that point later for the evolution and revolution thing. But it's gonna be, things are gonna be different. It's coming. But right now and up to now, it was used in a very poor way. But we're starting to use it for what it's truly built for, which is communication and information. And with information. That's the only way we can evolve, and also evolution. Information. They've. How can I say that? They've for information for health, for example, and the way we eat and all that. They kind of made it. How can I say that? I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. It's the fact that we got cut off too. I had the thought in my mind and it disappeared. They changed the reality of things, and they gave us false information, for example, for how we're eating and all that. And that's because of we're coming back to the lobbying and stuff, but it's because they have so much power that they can push false information in our heads, and on our generations, and make us do what's wrong for us. For example, eating McDonald's all day and all that, like it was advertised as good, and and for example, sugar is the worst thing you can put in your body, by the way. I hope like you realize that it's even worse than alcohol, and it gives the same disease as alcohol, but they even they made the scientific, like they made the studies, they make the scientific studies, and they buried these studies because it wasn't going their way, and so they cut off information that way, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, when it comes to one thing that I think is most important and foundational for your generation, and then, of course, Gen Z that's coming up underneath you, is the most important thing. People always talk about, well, how can we get rid of government? Now, throughout history, obviously the biggest problem I see is throughout history, the only way people overthrew corrupt or tyrannical governments was through revolution. But my problem with revolution is, and even within the actual definition of the term, is it always brings you right back to the same starting point. It's a reset, but you're going to end up back in the same place. So for me, the most important thing as far as young people learn is to, and once again, we're going to be talking about the evolutionary aspect. It's intellectual evolution. So just like when you're a kid and when your parents teach you as a kid, you know, when you were young, you believed in Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny, or if you come from a religious family, you believed that God would throw you in hell, right? And me too. And you were taught that God will put you in hell if you do anything wrong and all. But as an adult, so once you have that intellectual evolution, when you no longer believe in the Easter Bunny or Santa Claus, you didn't have to kill the Easter Bunny, you didn't have to kill Santa Claus, and you didn't have to kill God. You just had to remove that concept as anything that's legitimate in your mind. And
you have to question everything.
Right. And what I'm hoping you young people will adopt is, it's not that you have to create a revolution, you just have to make it, and technology will help you tremendously in this area, is make it so that all the things that you want, so whether it's health care, you know, providing for defense or providing for a safety net of something, it's just as long as you can come up with some means where it can be done on a voluntary exchange, you don't have to go and, you know, you don't have to violently oppress or violently oppose your government or stand up with arms against them. You just have to make them so they're obsolete, right?
Okay, you want to jump to revolution like real quick, because that's the thing. Like, I don't think revolution is possible nowadays. Like, at least a violent revolution, because they have too much power anyway. They have as many weapons, as many people as they want. They have the policemen, the army, and all that, and they've built up on this. They stacked on this. Like, the US has 100 billion. How much? 1,000 billion as a military budget, or 800 billion, which is enormous. So how can you have a violent revolution when they have this much power? You cannot. You cannot. And the only way we can do revolution, but rather evolution, is through the thinking process and the technological and scientific evolution. But they're pushing against that too. But we're gonna try anyway. But that's the only way. That's the only viable way, and that's the way they've done it in Paris. By the way, you were talking about Enlightenment, the Enlightenment. The revolutionary years, the revolution in France, and that led to the world that we're living in. That's not what they thought about, by the way, but it came through the intellectuals. The intellectuals made it happen. The intellectuals made the change and made that we bypassed the monarchy, and that we changed the way we were ruled upon. But then the problem with revolution again, and evolution too, is that it can be corrupted. And we've seen that with Robespierre. Robespierre was, at first he was part of it, but then he corrupted the process. And he did the same thing that the guys before, and he cut the heads of everyone because he was power tripping. Giving too much power to someone, whether it's for revolution or evolution or whatever, or in the normal process that we are, is always going to lead to bad things. So power must be dissipated through the individuals. We're coming back again. It's for soccer again, but it's the truth. That was my point about it.
Right on. Well, you know, when it comes to that, because I hear a lot of the young people today, and the flip side of that now, you're going to hear from people, and I'm very thankful he's now become very popular on social media. Are you familiar with
Jordan Peterson? Yeah, I love the guy. Yeah.
So just like me as a parent, this is what I taught my children too, and like it works great. So in addition to giving people rights, so rights, once again, when I talk about rights, I'm talking about negative rights, to be free of force and coercion and theft. So, but in addition, how you eliminate government, and this is the part of that evolutionary process, is you have to adopt responsibility. So your rights are entrenched as the sheer fact that you're a human being. So the fact that you're a human being is automatically, and it's universally consistent, you should be free from force, theft, or coercion. But in order for that to happen, you have to be willing to reciprocate that back to everyone else. So politics is this constant where everybody seeks to use the big gun in the room as a means to impose their mandates, because everyone thinks that my way is the best way. My way is the best way. No, your way is the well, if you adopt your own personal responsibility, right? So same with healthcare and stuff. I would gladly pay for, well, to me, the doctor is the one that's performing the service. So I want that doctor to be greatly rewarded, but I want that money. So, so if I'm paying money into a pool, right? If we want to have some kind of social safety net, I'm completely for a social safety net, but it should be done just like as if there was absent of government mandate. It's just like an insurance pool. So everybody agrees they're going to pay a certain amount of their income in. Let's say it takes 5 or 10%. It gives everybody the ability to have a social safety net in case in case some people need it. It's not a bad thing. But the beautiful thing, if you did it under a voluntary, a market type of system, what would probably work out, the best market, the best solution would actually probably end up resulting in something that would be something along the lines of, you still there? Hello?
Yeah, I'm still there. I'm still there.
Okay. So how that would probably work, now, like I say, this is just one potential, because you never know, because in a free market there might be many different creative ideas, but I've thought of even just myself. So let's say, there's 36 million people in Canada. Let's say, like I say, for everyone to have a social safety net, let's say it required 10% of your income. So everybody voluntarily agreed to pay into it. Now, people would say, oh, but there's some people that won't pay. Well, there's already people now that don't pay. The bulk of the 1% don't pay. The people that are living below the poverty line aren't paying because they're not paying into taxes. So there's always going to be areas where there's not going to be everyone willing, capable to pay. But if you have that social safety net, let's say at the end of the year, like, you don't have to call it government. It's just, like I say, it's just another business model. But let's say this business that is the insurer takes everybody's income. Are you still there? Hello? Hello?
Yeah, I'm still there. I'm still there.
Okay. Are you?
I'm listening to what you're saying.
Okay. It was quiet there, so I didn't know if you were there.
Yeah, but I'm cutting my mic
I got
breathe too loud or anything.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Okay. So anyway, so what I was, so basically, let's say, just to make things simple, let's say the 36 million people paid into a pool for insurance, and it brought in $1 billion a year, let's say. I'm just picking a number here. But let's say it brought in $1 billion a year. And then as a result of that year, however much of it went paid out for people that needed to use that service, right? So let's say the payout at the end of the year was $800 million. And that's how much the cost was to cover everyone for that year. Well, at the end of the year, it's just simple accounting. So at the end of that year, you would have $200 million left over.
I think I'm gonna have to call you back because it's cutting again.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello?
Yeah, you want to call me back?
Yeah, I think it's cutting a lot.
Okay, call me back.
Yeah, I totally agree. It has to be voluntary, though. Like it's the thing.
Yeah, well, like I say, like if there was $1 billion at the end of the year, people used the expenditure of all the health care provided for that year was $800 million. Now, what people could do is say, okay, and this is so easy to do because, like I say, we live in the information age. So what people could do is, okay, there's $200 million. You redistribute back equally. For everyone that paid in, they can either take their portion of that $200 million back, or they can put that towards the next year, which will make their premiums cheaper because they didn't use the entire pool of the $1 billion. So now, and that, to me, that's the proper way to do things. So when people say, "Oh, you need socialized healthcare," socialized healthcare just makes it so that the doctors aren't compensated properly. Maybe some less competent doctors are paid almost as equal as someone that's much more competent. So you're not they're not being paid based on merit, and a lot of that money that goes to healthcare gets tied up into bureaucracy, multiple layers of unnecessary bureaucracy. Whereas I would rather the people that are actually providing the service or the product, I want them to be compensated properly. I want a doctor that's amazingly capable and competent. I want him to be paid properly. I don't want him to be forced into this thing where he has to feel that he's compelled to offer his service at whatever rate the government dictates. That's just not the proper way. And in a proper market setting, there would be multiple layers. There would be doctors that would want to cater to the poorer people of the community. But they could do it, like I say, with having a little bit maybe higher premiums if there were people that were maybe a little bit more susceptible, maybe had a history, So there's going to be ways that the markets will work around it. Now, because I'm not a central planner, I'm not someone that wants to go into government, I am not going to suggest that I have an answer to that question. The market will provide. I hear people all the time, I'll use a couple real quick examples. People talk about, oh, well, when you're riding a motorbike, you should have a helmet, or when you're riding a car, you should have a seatbelt.
It's your choice.
Yeah, I agree. But what the beautiful thing about when they say that is the fact, the only reason why they know what a helmet or a seatbelt is because the market has already created it. Before there was ever legislation to mandate that people had to wear a helmet or wear a seatbelt, there was auto manufacturers that were appeasing their customer base by offering them a product with more safety features. That was already introduced. So the market already has the ways and mechanisms through the beautiful, like Adam Smith said, through the invisible hand. The market already understands, basically by the interactions with the public, they know where the demand is from, and there's always going to be someone that will be innovative, creative, and entrepreneurial, will come up with a better way to offer that product or service. Uber, Lyft, I mean, look at all these disruptions, cryptocurrencies. There's geniuses out there that can fix our problems, except we're stuck in this quagmire of thinking that these inept central planners are the ones that we need to look to solve our social and economic problems. They're the last people on the planet you want to solve your problems.
But that's the thing. Like, every time someone comes up with a better idea, they're ridiculized. When they say, oh, it's not good for you, they don't say it's not good for you because they want to impose their things on you. They want to inform you of that thing. Like, for example, the people that inform about what you eat, the people that informed about environment, the people that inform about healthcare, cryptocurrencies. Every time you come up with something that makes sense and that if it was explored would be beneficial to humanity, they're ridiculized because the government owns the media, and they like to do it. They like to ridiculize people. They like to make their ideas obsolete to the other people, to the pleb.
Yeah, well, government and lobbying and corporations and creating this whole vessel, where everybody goes to use the gun in the room to impose their ways onto other people. It's such a major limiting factor to human, like you were saying earlier, growth and development. Perfect example back in the day when people were trying to eliminate slavery, right? Yeah, people were making and lobbying and say, oh, if you get rid of slavery, there will be nobody that'll pick the cotton. But the market, innovators, creative people figured out a way, oh, look, we can create these machineries that can do this work instead.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. So there's always going to be ways, and it goes back to incentives. Because we know humans work off of incentives, you need people to have the proper incentive. And the proper incentive would be to let innovative, creative ideas that are, completely... Yeah.
Science should rule everything.
Yeah, of course.
And by the way, like when you talk about the machines that do the people's work, like I see so many people afraid of machines that they're afraid of that they would take the works that they're doing and all that stuff. Like they're gonna take everyone's job. But these works, they're gonna be taken away for greater good. Like people are gonna get better educated for better jobs, and we can move on that way. It's evolution.
Yeah, well, they even used that same kind of fear-mongering rhetoric back in the day when Model T Ford was first introduced, and they started creating the assembly line. They were saying, well, back in the day, they were saying all the people that were grooming and selling horses, right? They were saying,
Yeah, yeah.
you're disrupting our market. Plus, there were a lot of people that were paid on the lower end of the pay scale. They were paid to go out
Yeah,
on the city
yeah,
streets.
it's such bad jobs
Yeah,
anyway,
to
and
scoop
they're
up
boring, and they don't like their
shit,
jobs.
right?
Yeah,
And now you don't have
why
to
would
worry.
you defend that?
Exactly. So there's always going to be people that their business model is going to be disrupted by innovation, but we're glad that that happens. You know, if we use that concept to restrict our limit of growth, well, we would still all believe the Earth is flat and that the Earth is the center of the universe.
Exactly.
Because Galileo and Newton, they broke through all those paradigms, but back in those days, people, they wanted to reject it because most people, they're scared of adopting new and learning new information. They get set in their ways. Once again, it all goes back to our biology and how we evolved as human beings. But because we're modern human beings now that have so much capacity to learn intellectually and expand our knowledge, we can't use these excuses no more. These excuses are, like I say, it doesn't work in this modern information age.
Yeah, no, I agree. And have you read Isaac Asimov, like Foundation and the robotics and all that?
Oh, Asimov, yes.
Is incredible. But yeah, it was the same thing. Like people in Asimov's world, like I mean, it's Earth in the future. It's supposed to be now, by the way. But the thing is that they were scared of robotization. They were afraid and they were pushing against robotization. But what they don't understand is that, well, not in the book, but right now, what people don't understand is that when you have automatization and all these things that took away the painful and low-class jobs, you can have concentration on things that really matter, like creativity and all that. Like creativity, like when I mean creativity, like philosophy and science of every sort, like you can push that, and that this would be the only jobs available, and you wouldn't have people working in the manure and people working in factories and defending all these jobs that are really bad and that they hate, by the way. I don't know why they're defending these jobs, because they hate them. Like, I don't, like, if you're telling me you like your factory job where you just scan stuff all day, you're lying to me. Like, you cannot possibly like that.
Exactly. No. Well, what it is like you say, they've created a model that, like, it has worked, and I will say, you know, even our Prussian education, and because it was a result of the post-industrial era, and it was more or less to teach people how to be more conformist and more industrious, you know, there was times in the past that might have been beneficial or a net positive in comparison to the old world way of doing things, like the division of labor. This is a great thing, but like you say, we've shown time and time again throughout all of modern history that every time there's this fear-mongering, this pretense that, if we disrupt, it's going to be terrible. We've shown every time that we will come up with ways. Humans have an infinite amount of ambition, wants and needs. They will always find a way. People will always find a way. You know, you even put people, there's people that have been sitting in prison their whole life, restricted and confined to a small space 24 hours a day, and they will still find a way to make their life ambitious. You know, they will still try to create things that make them still want to live. So people will find ways to be creative. They will find ways to innovate. They will find ways to fill up their days, their time. They don't have to be fearful of all these changes. I think these changes are great. And one thing I want to point out real quick is when people talk about these super ultra environmentalists. I
was about to talk about that exactly.
Well, I love the environment. I'm someone that I grew up in the country and I've lived in the city, so I've seen the best of both worlds. I love in the country, but the thing is, what people forget when they talk about nature. The state of nature is great, but there's most people when they say, "Oh, I love the nature. Let's not disrupt the nature." Well, that nature, as beautiful it is, it's also very, very violent and can be very harsh. You know, without humans' ability to create and innovate, well, we would all be living in cages, right? Might not have figured out how to invent fire, so we'd be all living very cold, much cold. We wouldn't have chairs and desks and tables and refrigerators. So nature is beautiful, but let's keep a little bit of a reasonable common sense when you're talking about nature. Nature is both beautiful, but it's also very harsh to the human being.
Yeah, but it should be. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, but it should be something that is parallel. Like you cannot destroy nature, you cannot overcome nature, and you cannot let nature overcome you either, because nature is violent, as you say. But now what we have as a system is that we're over exploiting nature, and it's coming back to bite our ass, like our asses, because where I come from is getting hit by super hurricanes. I almost lost my father last year, and these super hurricanes are direct consequence of this over this over utilization of the planet. It's directly, like, climate change is real. Like they shouldn't say climate change is not real. It's a direct evolution of our abuses of the nature. Like when you fish, like for example, they fish like industrially, and they don't let the fish reproduce. And what happens is that we've lost like about 40% of our wildlife. Like I believe it's more in the sea. It's like 80% of the fishes. Like there is no like diversity anymore, and all the fishes, like they don't reproduce anymore, and we're losing like species like crazy. And I don't know how you think it's sustainable even for us. Like we're gonna be bite right back in the ass for that. But also other stuff is that with the over I'm sorry, I'm losing my thought, but the over production, the overproduction is rising the level of the temperature of the sea. And when we see that, and we know that an effect of rising the temperature of the sea is that the air that passes above it, when it comes above hot water, it becomes the wind that comes from it becomes more violent, and these are what have caused these super hurricanes. And the Caribbeans are gonna get they're gonna get wiped out by these super hurricanes, and it's gonna be a problem. You're gonna see in a few years, not even a few years, like we've already seen it with Irma. They're gonna get wiped out, and nobody's gonna do anything about it. They're gonna say, "Oh, it's fine again."
Well, when it comes to the environmentalist stuff, what I do once again, because it works in every area, in every aspect of human endeavors, is I do believe there is a contribution to this climate change, or they've changed the term around, so global warming, climate.
Yeah, no, like I don't like global warming. Global warming was a kind of shifting. Like they wanted to shift the attention. It's not only global warming. It is not even only climate change. It's change of nature. They're destroying like the forest and everything, and it has colossal effects. But it's not climate. It's not only climate. Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, yeah. Well, what I was going to say though, like as far as, especially when you're talking, actually, since you brought up forestry, I'll just point out where I'm from, New Brunswick. It's a huge industry. Of forestry is one of the major industries. Now it's shrinking continually, but it's also the reason why the industry is shrinking is not just the simple fact of because of prices, inflation, but because there are many different value-added materials that they use now, whereas before they didn't. So chipboard, particle board. So the market's already been creative and innovative enough where if you go to, like I say, where I live, instead of just a bunch of clear cut, now they have select cutting. They have it so that they leave enough real growth so that the forests can sustain themselves, because it's best business practice for people like this, such as the Irvings, which is a big corporation on the East Coast, because they want to be able to constantly do that stuff going forward. So they have an incentive to make sure that they don't just clear all the land, because it's not just good for politics,
Yeah,
but it's also good as far as them innovating and creating. Now, what I will say though is, as much as we do contribute to some of this climate change throughout history, the history of the globe, there has been times where the climate has changed just because of the fact that we go through cooling and heating cycles. So we are definitely contributing to it. I will not reject that. I'm not a climate denier by any shape or stretch of the imagination. But what I suggest is the market will figure out best practices for the most part. Now, there's no guarantee of that, but what I will say, in the absence of actual innovation and proper creative methodology and proper incentives, the way governments do it, the government's just like a big giant hamper, and they try to pretend everything is nail. What they're trying to do now with these carbon credits and carbon pricing, all that's ultimately going to happen as a consequence of the result of that is, once again, you and I, the people on the lower end of the spectrum,
are going to pay.
Yeah, we're the ones going to pay. So they'll just buy off each other's credits. They'll shift things around on the big giant chessboard, and ultimately, once again, we're the ones that's going to be sacrificed to pay for this, while these irresponsible actors in the economy, they just lobby government to get protection, or as long as the fines. There's another thing. Look at the oil spill.
Yeah, every time it's massive. Every time it's a record. What the hell? They think we're idiots. They think we're idiots.
Right, but all the governments did was said, I'm going to fine this corporation, so British Petroleum, $1 billion. Meanwhile, they still make a profit, let's say, of $10 billion. To them,
they shouldn't get fined. They should get like prohibited to do business anymore. Because they're not responsible.
Yes, there should be a way for, exactly, there should be a way for shareholders, for the consumers, for all of us to be able to hold these people to account. But because it's all done through government, once again, it's just a bunch of people that are trying to figure out a way how they can make it, they can put on the perception that they're trying to help things, but in reality, they're just in there scratching each other's back, exchanging money, exchanging favor, and at the end of the day, the people that did the terrible thing, you know, they're not held responsible once again. So
no, and they're doing it again. And every time it's bigger.
Yeah. So once again, it comes back always to me. It always comes back, and it's not just by sheer fact. So I can make the moral argument that it's always good to use proper market forces and fundamentals. There's the moral argument, but I'll even make the economical and the efficiencies argument, because the market has always shown time and time again that the market is much more innovative, creative, and can shift much quicker than government policies, mandates, or regulations. They don't really have anything to do with changing things. They're just, like I say, what government represents to me is some people holding up a big giant ad or a sign saying things on parchment or paper in a big flat or on a flashing neon sign, but it's just words. It doesn't mean anything. That's rhetoric. The reality on the ground never translates. Whereas, if you allow market innovation, and look at what we're seeing today. I mean, you got Elon Musk and his people like him that are already massive disruptors into the oil and gas sector. Now, of course, I understand that a lot of these big machinery that dig and mine and extract a lot of these minerals, of course, they have to use oil and gas too. But that's the thing.
But that's improvement already.
Exactly. But we're not going to try to get away from it just overnight. But if we allow markets to figure out ways and be creative, then, you know, we're already seeing that there's methods already to greatly reduce our carbon footprints without having to use these stupid, like I say, like a government, the big gigantic hammer that just goes around treating everything like it's a nail. That's not a proper way to deal with anything.
No, that's true. But I want to come back to the climate thing. It's the climate. It's not climate. Like it's a shift. It's a shift of attention. Like bringing everything to climate and global warming and all that. It's not climate. It's nature destruction. Like it's when you were talking about the forest in New Brunswick. Like they're doing renewable things and all that. Well, it's only because you can see it as a Westerner. But when you look at forests in the Amazon or Madagascar and all that, where you can't see it, and when we don't have control on it, and which are the biggest forests, by the way, there is so much abuse. They're destroying everything in order to make palm plantations and gold exploitations and all that. And it's just criminal.
But you know what, a lot of that, I just got to say something real quick so I don't lose my train of thought there, okay? But when it comes to that stuff, this is once again, and it can be tied to, so whether you're talking about South American countries or even once again the First Nations people in some of our own countries, once again it comes back to, and this is something, if you go back to even John Locke,
Sorry.
John Locke was someone that talked about and discussed and it was one of the foundational and most important aspects of the U.S. Constitution, and what we recognize in Canada is property rights. So the problem with some of these South American countries, and Venezuela is another perfect classic example, is this whole pretense of socialism or communism, or
They got bought off.
right, when you do that, when you set things up where there's nobody that has actual authority or possession over a parcel of land, they're not going to be held accountable. And an easy way to explain that to most people, and most people understand, is if you buy a car yourself that you got to pay for, or if you go rent a car, you're going to treat them totally different.
Yeah.
A car that you buy with your own hard-earned cash and money, you're going to take better care of that because it is your property. Whereas if it's something that's considered just a collective parcel of land and nobody really owns it, or the government owns it, well, usually that's the time when you see that it's not going to be taken care of or properly used, the resources in a more beneficial way. So like I say, so when it comes to the Irving group, the reason why the Irvings take care of that land is because they own that land, and they want maybe their kids that's going to take over the business. They want them to be able to have a productive and efficient company in the future. So once again, it goes back to incentives. Whereas when you have like a lot of these South American countries, or even some of these countries where everything's thought of as just the collective good, when nobody owns it, when nobody has an actual right to that particular property, they don't feel they have the responsibility. So once again, your rights has to be completely, on the other side of rights has to come responsibility. And people that are actually people that actually own things are always, now there are exceptions to the rule, there's always exceptions to the rule, and the bad actors that don't hold themselves to that kind of accountability, well, those are people that, if there was a place in South America that it was a private company and they were doing things terribly, well, then that's where the rest of the people, if you care about it, well, don't buy their products, don't buy their, let this company go under.
People have more power than what they think.
Oh, amazing. And people have more, they have
Stop buying fucking Nutella. That's bad for you for once, and they're destroying the earth because you keep buying it, so they make more of it, so they're gonna get more palm rays in Madagascar, all these areas, and they're gonna destroy more forests because of you buying that Nutella. And this is gonna give you like artery clogs and all that stuff, and it's your fault. You have more power as a consumer than you think.
Amazing amount of power, and that's the thing. Yeah. But this is the problem with, once again, with governance intervention in the economy is we don't have the capacity anymore to affect our power over economic and social activities, because what we see now, especially with fiat currencies, is they print money, and now they offload debt obligations onto future and successive generations through inflation of the monetary system. So we no longer even have the ability. It used to be, before the gold standard was eliminated, you could hold the economic bad actors in the economy, or these stock market manipulators or governments, you could hold them to account by withdrawing your economic support. But now, as we've seen the financial crisis after that, what happened in 2008, there were a lot of people that withdrew, like a lot of industrial investors withdrew their support because they recognized that, they were tricked into buying a lot of these mortgages that were like junk rated bonds, more or less, and they withdrew that support. But what the government did is they used the Keynesian model, and they instead of allowing the market to correct all that malinvestment and that bad behavior, what they did is they painted over it by printing money. So now it's like having a never-ending extended credit card, where how is anybody going to hold anyone to account? We as a people anymore, we don't have any way to really hold governments to account, because they can just print money with the central bank and paint over all of it. We can withdraw all of our money tomorrow out of the banks, but it isn't going to matter because they'll just recapitalize them.
No, and by the way, because we're talking about information and all that, people, like, if you're listening, like, you are richer than what you think, just stop buying McDonald's every single day. Just stop buying all this useless stuff. Just keep your money to yourself. Like, stop giving them money. They don't fucking care about you anyway. All they want is your money, and they don't, like, when I say they don't care about you, it's even worse than that. They're giving you poison. Like, it's poisonous for you. So, like, I'm sorry. It's just, it baffles me, because, but it's also the thing of information. Like, people are not informed about that. And we're seeing all the effects of that, like dementia is rising, obesity, which is like it's the most like blatant fact that our society is wrong about a lot of things. Is like you see all these obese people or these crazy people that are rising, but you're not questioning yourself. Like spend your money where you no, keep your money to yourself. Don't even spend it to people that don't care about you and that will give you problems in the end.
Right. Oh, I agree. Just because we're at an hour and 50 minutes, so we're only almost two hours. So maybe we should tie it up here soon. But I really want to just mention first and foremost there, I appreciate you having this conversation with me because to me the most important thing, like I say, and if you know anyone else that wants to have this kind of discussion, like I say, this is what I'm trying to do now.
Unfortunately, I don't enough. I really want to talk more about this, but people, they don't care. Like that's the bad part. But I apologize. I want to apologize because I'm not really a public speaker, or I'm not a speaker by any means, and that's why I can get lost on. I can lose track of what I'm saying, or I can make discrepancies, and I'm sorry about that. But that's I guess that's okay for you. But I just for the viewers, like I want to apologize for that.
Oh, don't worry, Alexander. You're already head and shoulder above most people, like you say, because a lot of people don't even want to discuss these things, or they accept things that they've been taught by certain people without questioning them.
It's information. Like I feel like what we're doing is awesome because like what you're doing. I love your channel. I love all of these. I'm gonna say progressive. I'm gonna put you in the progressive group, but progressive in my mind. Like it's not progressive like. It's progress for the human by information. You're informing them of the world that surrounds them. That's the only way that they're gonna evolve and change their mind. It's by having someone question some part of the environment they're part of. Like like that's what I mean.
Yeah, and I'm very thankful that I'm obviously an older guy. I'm 48 years old, but I'm very thankful that I grew up in the 80s. I started getting into computers in the mid 80s. I had my very first computer in 1986. But because I've kind of kept in contact with people that are, into computers, I've been into this for the most of my adult life, even though I've been into a lot of other things. But what I love about this YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and all these social media outlets is I know myself as a young man when I was growing up, for people to get proper intellectual knowledge or education, you had to have hard. Yeah, you had to have parents that had a lot of money, or they went out and spent a lot of money on like encyclopedias or books. Now, like I say, we live in the age of information where everything is at your disposal. If you're just willing to even start to learn, and I'm like I say, learning it's an ongoing process. I will be learning until the day I die. But what I will say to everyone that ever listens to me is I've had my own preconceived notions and perceptions change multiple times over the course of my life. I thought I knew it all when I was in my 20s. Yeah. I thought I knew it all when I was in my 30s. Well, I mean, you think even if you're more knowledgeable than your peers, you're still always constantly learning because there's always new information that you might have not been privy to in the past. Yeah. And all I ever expect of people is just listen to other people's perspective, other people's opinions, and trust me, if you're a human being, and you don't even need a very high IQ. I'd say even if you have 90 or above, you probably at least have the capacity to discern the kind of information that makes sense objectively and morally, if you just have people tell it to you properly. And that's another thing what I do is I try to be, well, it's not like I'm from academia anyways, but as you can tell, I speak in pretty typical layman terms. So I don't try to make things, like I don't use legalese or doublespeak to twist or manipulate. I try to be as clear and concise in my language so that anybody can learn and understand what I'm talking about. True. Right? And that, to me, that's the most important thing. And if you, younger generation, you people from your age group and your demographic, if you continue on doing the same thing and take full advantage of having access to this beautiful capacity that we have, because you never know what's going to happen in the future. Take advantage of this amazing ability, this modern Gutenberg press, like I said, this Enlightenment era tool and this instrument at our disposal. Take advantage of this and help as many people as you can. And hopefully, if enough of us keep doing the same thing, truth, humanity, we take a step back once in a while, for sure. But truth, competence, courage, and your convictions and being principled, they will keep advancing us. Like I say, we'll step out of our teenage years, and hopefully by your generation, when you come to my age, or maybe your kids, we will finally become all adults, and we'll learn how to cohabitate and coexist with each other peacefully, socially and economically, voluntarily, without having this pretense of using force and compulsion and violence towards each other.
I totally agree. I hope that one day we're going to be like in the foundation books, like from Isaac Asimov, and rule the universe, really. Like I believe that we have the power to do it only if we listen. And I totally agree with all what you said. Like, it's through learning and improving ourselves that we're going to reach that. And by the way, I'm in computer science for the computer thing. Like, I totally agree. Computers are awesome because they permitted us to improve as human. They were great tools, and we should keep pushing it. Like, people shouldn't be afraid of what we can do with computers. Like, of course, you should be afraid if it falls in bad hands, and it will. But ultimately, it's going to improve humanity.
Yes, never fear change, embrace it, but as you say, but adopt it in a socially and morally and philosophically honest manner. There's, like you say, there's always going to be people on this planet. There's never going to be a utopia world where there's no such thing as bad actors. That's always going to happen. That's always going to exist. But if you have the bulk of the people, which I expect that will be the case, I think it has been the case actually for at least the last couple hundred years since the Enlightenment era. I think most people, people still do bad things, but most people, I would say, are predominantly good people that just do bad things on occasion. And sometimes, and most of the times, the bad things they do are a lack of opportunity, a lack of self-esteem. I mean, there are many areas in psychological aspects that affect humans and why they do bad things. But once again, if you just give people the opportunity, well, they will automatically congregate and adapt to things that are more done in a more peaceful, more voluntary manner, because they'll see the reciprocal effect of that. People love doing things for themselves and others when they see that everyone is a benefit and there's no negative costs involved as far as using force and coercion, which is, like I said before when we first started in this video, most of the things we do on a daily basis is done voluntarily. So we just got to expand that out to the rest of the economic and social endeavors.
Yeah. Keep informing people. That's awesome. That's the only way we're going to change things.
Right on. All right, Alex. Well, I'm going to let you go, man. And like I said, I really appreciate this great conversation. Thank you
a lot for having me.
No problem. And if you ever want to do it again, well, now we've got our Skype information. Feel free to contact me, and we can do this again in the future at some time.
Yeah, I hope I'll get better at speaking and at developing my thoughts. But yeah, that's the only way I can do it anyway. So improving by doing.
Exactly. Yeah, practice makes perfect, man.
Yeah.
All right. You have a great day, Alexander.
You too.
Take it easy.
Bye-bye, Bennett. Bye.
Well, that was a great conversation. Once again, like I said, I'm answering the call, folks. Interviews are coming. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.